So what exactly is Nova doing? Are you only training people who want to be chiefs of staff, or are you also placing them?
Yeah, good question. We do both. We do both. Our flagship product that we launched with, that we've got, nearly 1,000 students across 30 countries, is our online chief of staff certification course. And giving up a little control is one way to put it. Another way to put it is allowing the business leader to do what they do best, and also preparing them in the best way possible to make them efficient as a leader. So what we do at Nova is we've got 50, 60 hours in our course that is required to gain certification. It's self-paced, it's online. We've got over 500 of our the biggest companies across the world enrolled in our course, with high level executive assistants and current chiefs of staff, aspiring chiefs of staff, future entrepreneurs, business operations leaders, et cetera. And what we do is we essentially have built this course with hands-on practice as the key focus for our students. So our students are building briefs so that their leader can be prepared for every single thing they walk into. They are writing strategic recommendations so that through clear documentation and everything else, chiefs of staff and aspiring chiefs of staff can see things clearly enough to say, hey, wait a minute, I think we need to consider a session where we think about our operational efficiencies, because we're not talking about today's business. We're only looking back and looking forward. Chiefs of staff should be strategically recommending improvements to the business all the time. We train chiefs of staff in a lot of other hands-on ways, like throwing complex offsites and all hands events, and ghostwriting for their leader, presenting visually, verbally, digitally, mock meetings, investor updates, like the list goes on, but it's all real life scenarios based on what chiefs of staff do every day. So it's pretty incredible. We've got rave reviews, and folks leave our course telling us that they feel more confident than they've ever been, that they can do the chief of staff job, that they're validated that they're already doing it, and that they're resourced with roadmaps and frameworks and 30 plus templates to really hit the ground running and feel like they can accomplish a lot as a chief of staff.
What is the and if it changes based on other things, what's the cost of going through the certification program? Somebody says, I want to do this because I want a job as a chief of staff. What does that
Yeah,
cost to
yeah.
go through the program?
It is $1,850 this year. So there won't be price changes for the rest of 2025. We usually do a price increase at the end of the year for the next year. And we also do placement. So we work with business leaders to find them chiefs of staff. We do coaching and consulting. And we also teach in person now. So a conference company reached out to us last year and they said, hey, we're seeing what you're doing in this market. We want you to teach your certification in person at our conferences. And we had our first one this past October. And we have 3 more this year where we train people live across the 3-day format.
Well, congrats. That's awesome. I love that. I
Thanks.
love that. I love to hear that. What about the placement? How does that work? I'm sure there are people listening to this, watching the show that are like, hey, I need a chief of staff. How do you help person find someone like that?
Yeah, so we work with the business leaders to understand who you are, what you need, how you work, and we help you understand the chief of staff role. And then we go out and use our extensive network of hundreds of thousands of folks and find you an excellent chief of staff. We do all the interviewing. We, deliver on a nice little shiny platter, 2 to 4 candidates. We help you decide if you're looking for help. We, essentially like work through the whole process with you as a normal kind of recruiting relationship would, and pass off final candidates, and hopefully you choose one. That's kind of how it works.
And how do you charge like a percentage like recruiters typically do of the salary?
Yep. We're around 20% of first year salary, but that can be fluid, dependent on if you prefer just a set fee or a percent of first year salary. So it can be worked out.
Hey there, it's the real Jason Duncan. Thank you for watching this video. If you are an entrepreneur and you've ever thought about what it's going to be like when you get ready to exit your business, I'm the guy you want to follow. So make sure that you've subscribed to this channel and go check out the link in the description, therealjasonduncan.com. Check out the resources I've got for people just like you, as an entrepreneur who's trying to get his life back, get her life back, get your time and freedom back. We've got a couple other videos you might be interested in. There's one here and there's one here. If that's what you want as an entrepreneur, if you're being trapped in your business, then I can help you get out of that. So go to therealjasonduncan.com. The link is in the description, and check out one of these videos. I'll see you next time.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because
Yeah.
the sizes of businesses that have chiefs of staff. I know you said earlier it doesn't matter about team size or revenue, and
Mhm.
I'm certainly not disagreeing with that as a concept, but really, I mean, when at what point should you consider it? Because a chief of staff is not an EA; it is a different level
Yep.
of employee that would also require a different level of compensation. So, at
Yeah.
what point would somebody be saying, "Okay, it's time to start looking at this"?
You want to be able to afford a chief of staff ranging, from about 140,000 to maybe 250, depending on your industry, your location, et cetera. Um, and I think the other side of that is it just depends on your needs and your company structure. I work with companies all across the country and chiefs of staff all across the country. And some of the most successful startups out there, chief of staff's like employee number 5. And then, of course, there's companies with hundreds of employees that don't have chiefs of staff. There's an awareness opportunity. So I'm out there yelling from the rooftops what a chief of staff does, why chiefs of staff are impactful. And I always recommend that you first hire executive assistant support because you absolutely do not want to be doing your own emails and scheduling and all of those day to day logistics as a business leader. So figure out your EA support first and then really determine if it's time for you and if you can afford to hire a chief of staff and what that impact could look like on what you're able to focus on.
So, what would you say to an entrepreneur who is hesitant to hand over the reins to a chief of staff? What would you say to that person?
I would say that you're not necessarily handing over the reins. The chief of staff role can look very, very different dependent on so many different factors: the business leader, the industry, the product, the how the business runs, like the life cycle of things. It can look very different. You, as the business leader, would still own what you need to own. There's no question. However, you're going to feel more prepared. You're going to be spending your time on less on things that don't matter as much. Like you do need to have that mindset of like, I'm ready to spend my time a little bit more on the high reward things, right? Like business development, leadership of the team, growth, 5-year planning, product development, if you're, a product focused company, right? So you're not giving up control over those important things. You are walking into a room more prepared. You're letting somebody else figure out your meeting cadence with your executive team. You're ensuring your executive team has visibility into everything you're doing because you haven't been able to give that in the past. You're too busy. You're making sure that you're not the one overseeing events anymore, like all hands. You're letting the chief of staff do that and get approvals from you. You're still in the know. You're still approving, but you're not doing the heavy lifting. So you're still engaged in the business, and a good chief of staff is going to ensure that you are engaged in the business and you do have visibility into the things that matter, but that you're spending your time on the things that really only the CEO or the business leader should be doing.
So, being a chief of staff, I think you said, is like managing the chaos behind the scenes. So, as a chief of staff, a former chief of staff, as someone who trains chiefs of staff, what's one of the dirty little secrets about business and executive leadership that most people wouldn't realize?
Well, some people know this and some people don't, but a lot of times executives aren't great leaders. They've gotten into leadership roles because they have incredible companies or they're really, really smart and they've moved quickly, right? But they may not have leadership experience and they may not have ever cared to really develop that part of them because they're working on other things. So a chief of staff is a way also to hire for that opportunity of yours. So if it's a dirty little secret, it's probably one that some of us already know that business leaders aren't always the best leaders, even though they're running, sometimes like very, very, very large companies.
Well, and you're working with really high powered executives all the time. I would ask you, what's the one thing in your opinion that separates the really good leader from one who's just playing CEO?
Caring about people, spending time on people, asking them how they're doing, how they feel, and making business decisions that show they care about their people.
Yeah, that's really good insight. Well, let me ask you a personal question about this, and not too personal, but what's a moment in your career, especially maybe as a chief of staff, where you had this moment of realization, I'm completely out of my depth here. I don't know what I'm doing. And like, tell us about that moment and what you did with it.
I think that some